The bell blares overhead, signaling the end of third period. Like a broken dam, hundreds of teenagers flood the corridor, slamming lockers, shouting across the hallway, shoving past one another with practiced disregard. Amidst the chaos, Mr. Henry Carter, 67, moves slowly, his limp nearly swallowed by the noise. He's dressed in a faded Navy janitor's uniform, stooping to retrieve a crumpled chip bag with his grabber. No one thanks him. No one sees him. A group of students barrels around the corner, laughing too loudly, radiating confidence. At the front is Jason Marks, a senior with the swagger of someone who knows the world will bend to him. Star quarterback, honor roll student when teachers bother to check. A phone is already in his hand. "Hey Dusty," Jason calls out, eyes lighting up at the sight of Henry. "Don't hurt yourself, all right?" Fossils crack easy. The hallway buzzed with the chaotic energy of changing periods. Lockers slammed, sneakers squeaked, and teenage voices rose in. A relentless tide. Mr. Henry Carter, 67, moved through the current like a forgotten stone in a riverbed. His limp, the result of an old injury, gave him a slow, deliberate gait. Dressed in his worn janitor's uniform, he pushed his cleaning cart and used mechanical grabber to pick up discarded wrappers and crumpled papers that students dropped without a second thought. The noise barely touched him anymore. He kept his eyes down, his focus on the task. Around him, teenagers laughed, flirted, and shouted, none of them giving him more than a passing glance if that. Then came the familiar echo of cruel laughter. A group of popular students rounded the corner, and at the center, like a king surrounded by jesters, walked Jason Marks, a senior, star athlete, and social media darling. Jason exuded the confidence of someone who never faced consequences. Spotting Henry, he nudged his friend and lifted his phone. "Hey, Dusty," he called out. "Mr. Spot, Scrub Daddy." The other snickered. Jason cracked open a can of soda, took a sip, and with deliberate carelessness, tipped it over. The fizzy liquid splattered across the polished floor. "Oops," he said, holding the phone up to record. "Better clean that before someone breaks a hip." Henry paused. He glanced at the mess, then slowly bent down, pulling a rag from his cart. The phone was still recording. Jason zoomed in as Henry dabbed at the puddle with mechanical precision. Laughter echoed around him, but Henry said nothing. He didn't look at Jason, didn't offer a word. His silence only fueled the mockery. Jason made exaggerated gagging noises, and his friends joined in, performing for the invisible audience who would later scroll through this moment online. As the scene unfolded, Principal Laura Middleton strode past, in heels that clicked sharply. On the tile, she barely spared a glance at the spectacle. To her, Henry was part of the scenery, always there, always silent. Just the janitor. As the bell rang again, the crowd dispersed. Jason wandered off, laughing and already uploading the video. Henry wrung the rag out into a bucket, straightened slowly, and began pushing his cart down the hall. His shoulders were hunched, but his hands were steady. He moved without a word, without anger, without anything visible on his face. As he neared the end of the hallway, he passed a dusty glass case mounted on the wall. The plaque above read Heroes of Valor, Alumni Wall. Inside were faded photographs of former students, soldiers, doctors, community leaders. One photo, half obscured by dust and glare, showed a younger Henry in uniform, standing proudly with a unit of decorated service members. No one looked at it anymore. No one noticed as he passed. Henry Carter shuffled into his apartment as the evening sun cast long shadows across the floor. The space was small, clean, and lined with memories that no one else ever saw. On the walls hung faded photographs of men in uniform, their youthful faces captured in moments of camaraderie and grit. A shadow box above a narrow mantel held a folded American flag beneath glass, framed by medals gathering dust. His boots thudded softly against the worn linoleum as he moved through the room with practiced routine, taking off his jacket and hanging it with care. The silence was thick, broken only by the creak of the old floor and the distant hum of traffic. He turned on the sink and began washing the single plate and fork left in the dish rack, the sound of running water morphing, in his mind, into the roar of gunfire. Flashbacks hit him like reflexes, desert winds whipping through the chaos of battle, smoke choking the air, the cries of wounded comrades. He saw himself younger, stronger, dragging a fellow Marine to safety, his face a mask of mud and sweat and determination. A voice called his name, Carter. Move, and he snapped back to the present, the plate slipping slightly in his hands. Later, that evening, he opened a letter from the VA. He didn't need to read the whole thing. The phrase disability revaluation denied jumped off the page like a punch. He sat heavily on the edge of his bed, the letter resting in his lap, his jaw tightening. Another rejection, another reminder that the system he served had long since forgotten him. The next morning at school, Henry moved silently through the halls with his mop and cart. The staff room was as cold to him as the student corridor. No one greeted him. Most teachers passed him by without so much as a nod. Only Miss Renee, a young history teacher with a gentle demeanor and a spark of curiosity in her eyes, ever noticed him. She smiled when she saw him that morning. "Coffee, Mr. Carter?" she asked, holding out a second cup she'd brought just for him. He nodded with a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you, Miss Renee," he said, his voice soft, gravelly from years of disuse. They sat briefly in the corner of the staff lounge while the others talked over them, never to them. "You used to be military, didn't you?" she asked one morning, eyes lingering on a Marine Corps pin on his cap. He gave a small nod, not elaborating. She didn't push. Meanwhile, Principal Middleton stood by the photocopier, grumbling to a district administrator over the phone. "We need to find cuts. Carter's salary is too high for a janitor, especially considering the benefits. He's old, barely effective. We could hire a contractor at half the cost." Her tone was crisp, efficient, devoid of empathy. Later, Jason's father, a tall, polished man with a commanding presence, met with her privately in her office. A retired military officer turned school board member. He made it clear where his priorities lay. "We need funds redirected to athletic scholarships. Jason's got real potential. Don't let a mop pusher stand in the way of a promising future," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. That afternoon, while Henry was repairing a broken table in the cafeteria, he overheard voices drifting through the half-open. "The door of the conference room. We'll let him go quietly. Say it's a staffing restructure. He's got no union protection. Just a memo, and he's out." Middleton's voice was low but clear. Another administrator murmured agreement. Henry stood still, holding his wrench with a white-knuckled grip, his heart pounding not with surprise, but with the cold ache of inevitability. He returned to his janitor's closet and sat on an overturned bucket, his mind reeling. There was no ceremony in this life now, no honor, just slow erasure. Each day chipped away at him, students, mocking staff, dismissing, systems failing. He had once commanded men in life or death situations. He had run into fire, shielded others, earned medals no one asked about. Now he was a ghost in a high school hallway, mocked by children and overlooked by adults. Only Miss Renee saw the man beneath the uniform, but a single kind voice could not drown out the tide of disrespect. As he closed the closet door behind him, the sound of laughter echoed down the hall with Jason again, filming some new prank. Henry stared at his reflection in the tiny mirror above the sink. Tired eyes, weathered skin, a survivor. But dignity, he realized, was harder to keep than life itself. The cafeteria buzzed with chatter and the clatter of trays, but Henry Carter moved unnoticed along the edges, mopping up a spilled juice box near the trash bins. The familiar sound of snickering caught his ear, followed by the flash of a phone camera. Jason was at it, again leaning against the wall, smirking as he filmed Henry through the bathroom door earlier that morning. The video hit the internet within hours, captioned with cruel efficiency, "Vietnam Grandpa still mopping." By the end of 2 days, it had crossed 100,000 views. Comments poured in laughing emojis, mock salute memes, and clips stitched with techno remixes of Henry's limp. Around the school, the fallout was immediate. Teachers chuckled behind coffee mugs when they thought no one was watching. Students began mock saluting Henry as he passed, calling out, "At ease, Sergeant Scrub," and laughing as if they'd invented comedy. He said nothing, didn't break stride, but his jaw clenched tighter each time. Later that week, in Miss Renee's third-period history class, the room buzzed with mild curiosity as she stood in front of the whiteboard, gesturing to a slide titled Veterans Week, Forgotten Heroes Project. Her voice was warm, enthusiastic. "Each of you will choose someone whose service has been overlooked, someone history left behind. You'll write an essay about who they were, what they did, and why their story matters." A few students groaned, most half listened. Then, with a smirk and a raised hand, Jason said, "Can I do mine on old Dusty, the janitor?" Laughter rippled. Across the room, Miss Renee paused, then leveled her gaze at him. "Only if you take it seriously," she said. Her tone was calm, but sharp enough to silence the snickers. "If it's mockery, it's an automatic 0. Jason gave a mock salute. "Yes, ma'am." The class moved on. That afternoon, Jason found Henry cleaning the stairwell, a bucket beside him and the mop gliding steadily across the tile. Jason leaned against the railing, phone in hand. "So, Mr. Carter," he began, voice thick with sarcasm, "anything you want to tell me for this hero paper? Like, did you win World War I or just invent the mop?" He expected silence, maybe a scoff certainly, not what came next. Henry stopped moving. He didn't look up right away. Then, slowly, he turned and met Jason's eyes, his expression flat and unreadable, but his voice cut with ice. "Google Sergeant Henry A. Carter, 1st Recon Fallujah," he said. Then he turned back to his work without another word. That night, Jason sat at his desk, still amused, and typed the name into his laptop. The smirk faded almost instantly. Articles, citations, and military reports filled the screen. He clicked one link, then another. The details emerged with startling clarity. During a 2004 firefight in Fallujah, Sergeant Henry A. Carter had led a rescue operation through a burning compound under heavy enemy fire. Despite multiple wounds, he saved 12 fellow Marines. He received the Silver Star for valor. Jason stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the trackpad, suddenly unsure what to do next. The man he had mocked, filmed, laughed at, and humiliated was not just some broken old janitor. He was a decorated war hero. The realization settled over him like cold water. The hallway laughter echoed differently now. Jason sat in the school library, eyes fixed on the glowing laptop screen, still reeling from what he'd read about Sergeant Henry A. Carter. The more he learned, the heavier the guilt grew. His father, sitting at the kitchen table later that night, barely looked up when Jason brought it up. "Did you know he has a Silver Star? He saved 12 guys in Fallujah." Jason's voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and shame. His father barely blinked. "So, that was 20 years ago. He's a janitor now. Don't go getting sentimental over some relic who couldn't plan for life after service." Jason stared at him, something twisting in his chest. For the first time, his dad's certainty felt hollow, brittle. "He was a hero," Jason muttered, more to himself than anyone. The next day, Jason waited until the hallways were empty and found Henry restocking toilet paper in the faculty bathroom. "Mr. Carter," he began quietly, I didn't know I'm sorry. Henry didn't turn. He kept folding towels and stacking them in a plastic bin. No, you're not, he said finally, his voice low. You want forgiveness because it looks good. Because you feel guilty now that you know I'm more than a joke. You don't mean it. You want content. Jason opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. Henry didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth in his words cut clean. Jason left, his apology trailing behind him like a broken thread. Meanwhile, Miss Renee, searching for old photos for her classroom's Veterans Week display, wandered past the dusty Heroes of Valor alumni wall in the back hallway. Something about the smudged glass caught her eye. She leaned in and wiped away grime with the sleeve of her cardigan. Beneath the dust, she saw it clearly, now young Henry, in full military dress, medals gleaming, face proud and unguarded. Her breath caught. She stared for a long moment, then left and returned minutes later with a cloth and cleaner. She wiped the entire display down, polished the frame, and placed a small bouquet of fresh flowers beneath the case. That same evening, she stayed late and added a new feature to the school website, a section titled Unsung Heroes, with a short biography and scanned news clipping of Sergeant Carter's service. She didn't ask for permission. She just did it. The next morning, it spread fast. Students began whispering in the halls, showing each other the article on their phones. Some laughed awkwardly, embarrassed by their past behavior. A few teachers shared it quietly in group chats. One girl, usually shy and quiet, stopped Henry near the cafeteria with wide eyes and said, "Thank you for your service, Mr. Carter." He nodded once, surprised, and kept walking, but something in his shoulders shifted, just slightly. Jason, shaken and still grappling with the weight of his past cruelty, poured himself into his assignment. His essay turned into something far deeper than a school project. He wrote with raw honesty about mocking what he didn't understand, about assuming a man's worth by his job title, about how easy it is to forget that quiet people carry the heaviest stories. He ended with a public apology, not just for filming Henry, but for dehumanizing him. Miss Renee, reading it in her office, wiped tears from her eyes. She showed it to Miss Middleton, hopeful, but the principal merely skimmed it and sighed. "This is well written, but we don't want to tie the school image to a janitor. It sets a complicated tone," she said, fingers already tapping on her keyboard again. Renee's eyes narrowed. "A war hero, not a janitor, a war hero." Middleton's reply was clipped. He should have mentioned it if it mattered so. Much later that week, the final blow came quietly. Henry was summoned to Middleton's office and handed a formal termination letter. "Budget cuts," she said briskly, not meeting his eyes. "Your position's being eliminated. We appreciate your years of service." Henry didn't protest. He didn't argue or ask for time. He simply nodded, folded the paper, and walked out with the same limp and quiet dignity he'd arrived with years ago. When the news reached Renee and Jason, it hit like a gut punch. Just when the truth had begun to surface, just when eyes had started to open, they had pushed him out. And worst of all, he didn't fight it like he had seen it coming all along. The auditorium was packed, buzzing with the low hum of students, expecting another dull Veterans Day assembly if they even remembered what day it was. But this time, the curtains weren't drawn by staff. Miss Renee and a small group of students had planned everything in secret, working after hours and using club funds and borrowed AV equipment. Jason stood backstage, nerves pounding in his chest. The lights dimmed, and Miss Renee walked up to the podium to offer a brief, steady introduction. "Today, we honor a man whose story has lived in silence for too long." She stepped aside, and Jason took her place, holding a printed copy of his essay with trembling hands. At first, his voice wavered, but as he read, it grew steadier. "We mock people we don't understand. We see someone's job and think it defines their worth. I was one of those people, until I found out what real courage looks like. The room was completely still. No whispers, no phones out, just silence and eyes fixed on him. Jason paused, looked into the crowd, and then spoke clearly. I want to invite Sergeant Henry A. Carter to the stage. Backstage, Henry had only come to clean out his locker. He was in plain clothes, ready to disappear quietly. He hadn't expected this. Miss Renee gently nudged him toward the wings, and as Jason called his name again, the spotlight shifted. After a long moment of hesitation, Henry stepped into view. The silence deepened, and then the projector flicked on. Images flashed across. The screen reel combat footage, citations, news headlines, and military commendations bearing Henry's name. Sergeant saved 12 Marines under fire. Silver Star recipient returns home in silence. Faces in the crowd changed shock or guilt. One student wiped her eyes. Another clapped first, then another. Soon the entire auditorium rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Some cried openly. Teachers clapped just as hard as students. Henry stood there, still, stunned. For a moment, he didn't know what to do with the noise after years of being ignored. At the very back of the room, Jason's father stood, arms folded, watching. Slowly and with solemn precision, he raised his hand and delivered a full military salute. Henry's eyes locked with his, and after a beat, Henry returned the salute, his posture straightening instinctively, the years melting away just enough for the Marine in him to rise. The applause surged even louder. Then came the twist, one that hadn't been planned by Miss Renee or Jason, but unfolded with perfect, unscripted timing. A student journalist, part of the tech crew, stepped up to the microphone and said, "We'd also like to invite Principal Middleton to the stage to explain why Sergeant Carter was let go." The room fell suddenly quiet again, but this time, the silence was charged. Ms. Middleton, caught in the crowd, hesitated. Every face was turned toward her. She slowly made her way on stage, adjusting her blazer, clearly rattled. We had to make budgetary adjustments," she began, her voice wavering. "We were not aware of the full extent of Mr. Carter's past." But murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jason stepped up again, holding up a printed copy of the Unsung Heroes page with Henry's military records, mitted to Middleton days before his termination. "You knew," he said calmly. "You just didn't care." The temperature in the room dropped. Eyes narrowed. Students crossed their arms. Teachers exchanged glances. What had started as a celebration of valor had become something else, a reckoning. Ms. Middleton's words trailed off. She looked at Henry, who stood with quiet dignity, saying nothing, needing to say nothing. The crowd spoke for him now. The school board meeting was packed wall to wall. Students, veterans, and local officials all gathered, buzzing with anticipation. At the front sat Henry Carter, composed as ever, though his presence now drew respect instead of indifference. After a public outcry and growing media attention, the board had been forced to act. The superintendent cleared his throat and read the decision aloud. Henry would be reinstated, not as a janitor, but as the school's first veteran liaison and youth mentor, a role created in his honor. The room erupted in applause, and cameras flashed as local news crews captured the moment. The headline would run the next morning: "Local war hero mocked for years, now honored by community." Interviews followed, and Henry, though reluctant with the spotlight, spoke softly about duty, respect, and second chances, not for himself, but for the students still learning what dignity means. Jason sat beside him at the meeting. The essay that had once been a joke now awarded top honors in a statewide competition. He visited Henry often now, no longer seeking forgiveness, but understanding. They drank coffee in Henry's modest apartment, surrounded by medals and folded flags. and talked about war, manhood, failure, and growth. Henry's guidance, once buried under silence, now shaped something real in Jason, an awareness of legacy, of consequence, of how easily we forget the humanity behind a uniform. Ms. Middleton's office was empty by the end of the month. The backlash, both public and internal, was swift and unrelenting. She submitted a quiet resignation, citing personal reasons, and left the school that had once echoed with her authority. In her place, Miss Renee stepped into a new title, Vice Principal. Her first act was to commission a permanent wall of honor prominently placed near the front entrance, no longer a dusty afterthought, but a proud, curated memorial to alumni who had served. Henry's portrait now hung in the center, polished and framed, a brief biography printed beneath it. Fresh flowers appeared beneath it weekly, often anonymously. Henry still walked the halls, but not with a mop now, with students beside him, sometimes laughing, sometimes just listening. He had not asked for any of it, had never sought recognition. But now, finally, he was seen not as a janitor, not even solely as a hero, but as a full human being. A man with a story, with scars, with quiet strength that had waited far too long to be acknowledged. The hallway was alive with chatter, lockers clanging, backpacks swinging, and sneakers squeaking across the tile. Just another ordinary school day. A new student, flustered and wide-eyed, dropped his books near the main staircase. Before he could bend down, Jason and another athlete knelt beside him, gathering papers and offering an easy smile. "Happens to all of us," Jason said, helping the kid to his feet. A few steps away, Henry Carter walked down the corridor, not in a janitor's uniform, but in a crisp suit and tie. His posture was upright, his limp still present but steadier, no longer the burden it once was. Students passed him and nodded with quiet respect. Some smiled, others stepped aside to give him room. He nodded back, his expression soft but unreadable, always composed. He paused before the wall of honor. His photograph, clean and polished, was now framed in gold, with a small plaque below, Sergeant Henry A. Carter, 1st Recon, Silver Star, Mentor, Protector, Hero. Fresh flowers stood in a vase beneath the frame, placed there just that morning. Henry reached out and touched the glass gently, his fingers resting briefly on the image of his younger self. Then he turned and walked down the hall, head high, dignity intact. Every step a quiet testament to a life of service, scars, and survival.